President McNair, Board of Trustees, faculty, staff, students, and Tuskegee friends. I am Kelly Samuels, and I am the Assistant Vice President of Institutional Effectiveness, Research, Assessment, and Strategic Planning. I'm delighted to welcome each of you to the President's Inaugural Symposium, which expounds upon President McNair's theme of leadership and excellence by highlighting the contributions of female leaders in higher education, faith, and business. As we prepare to hear from these phenomenal women, I could not help but reflect on President McNair's inaugural address, It's in Our Hands. I started to reflect on one of the most challenging experiences when I heard those words. It was 17 years ago on a Christmas morning when my oldest daughter was born 10 weeks early, 2 pounds, 12 ounces. And the neonatologist came to my husband and I and said, she's going to have to fight. And it's in yours, and even it's in her hands. They told us she would probably have neurological development impairment, learning disabilities, cerebral palsy, and vision losses. So I'm thinking, how is a 2 pound, 12 ounce little girl is it supposed to be in her hands? Well, I did some research about premature babies, specifically female African American premature babies. Female African American premature babies, nearly twice the odds survive as baby boys. Black baby girls are twice as likely compared with white baby boys. They're 2 times more likely to survive than white baby girls. So even from infancy, African American females have an innate ability to lead, show assertiveness, and be excellent. We are elated to have 3 panels featuring African American women leaders. Thank you. These 7 phenomenal African American leaders, African American women leaders. In higher education, Dr. Marvalene Hughes, President Emerita, Dillard University and California State University. Dr. Beverly Tatum, President Emerita, Spelman College. Dr. Dorothy Yancy, President Emerita, Johnson C. Smith, Shaw University. And we're delighted to have our own Roberta as the moderator of this panel. Our second panel is Leadership and Excellence in Religion. Reverend Dr. Yolanda Pierce, Dean. Dr. Love Seacrest, Dean of Faculty and Vice President for Academic Affairs. Reverend Brenda Shuford, Moderator. Leadership and Excellence in Business. Ms. Juanita Logan, Worldwide Technology. Ms. Teresa White, President of AFLEC US. And the moderator, our own Board of Trustee member, Ms. Norma Clayton. So we ask that you sit back and you reflect as I reflected yesterday after hearing those inspirational words about it's in our hands from our president. So I ask that you please stand and welcome the 8th president of Tuskegee University, Dr. Lily McNair.
Good morning. I'm so excited to be here this morning to welcome all of you in this panel of distinguished women leaders in higher education and in religion and in business today. It has always been my goal to highlight the examples of leadership that women provide across a variety of spheres. So this is my vision of what we can learn from exemplary women leaders. I'm so happy that you're here this morning. It's been a wonderfully exciting and long weekend. Some of us are losing our voices, but it's all for the good. So please, let's sit back, as Dr. Samuel says, and learn from our leaders. And Dr. Samuels, I have to say, I had not heard those statistics, but I knew what direction you were going in. So we have the data to support our conceptual ideas here. So thank you very much. Okay. So it's in our hands, and we are learning from exemplary women leaders in higher education so we can move forward with our vision here at Tuskegee University. Thank you all. I'm wearing my high heels today.
Good morning. Good morning. My name is Roberta, and I'm going to be the moderator for this session. It gives me great pleasure and I'm also humbled to be among these women leaders. It's always been a challenge in the 20th century and beyond that of women coming up and rising to the occasion. Against all odds, we seem to make it work. Our women are the backbones of our families, of our communities, and they just keep on doing what they do. Tuskegee made history yesterday in installing the 8th president of Tuskegee University, but more importantly, the first woman to be installed as our president. And so this panel is very appropriate because these women that I'm getting ready to introduce to you are all former presidents of major universities. So they know what it's like, and they have trailed that trail trying to get to the top and achieving great things. And they're going to tell us how they got there. They're going to begin with their story. We want to hear a little bit about them and what made them decide to want to rise up and do things that we feel sometimes are just so overwhelming that we can't even think about how we're going to achieve that. So I'm going to start first with Dr. Tatum and ask her to tell us a little bit about her story and what made her decide to become this great leader.
Well, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here with my colleagues and with all of you, and certainly in celebration of Dr. McNair, the 8th president of Tuskegee University. I am what I'm going to call a reluctant leader. And by that, I mean I didn't set out to be a college president or even to be in charge of anything. I was one of those people who liked to stay in the background. I remember as a kid, my mother always encouraging me to speak up and being reluctant to do that. But I am one of these people that when you see a problem, you want to solve it, right? I sometimes use the analogy of a ringing phone. You've been in the house when the phone's ringing. This is when we all have landlines. And the phone is ringing and nobody seems to be moving to answer it. Your brother's sitting there, he's not moving, nobody's moving to answer it, and then you say, okay, I'll answer the phone. And it's kind of like that. I think my experience of leadership was kind of like that. You see a problem and nobody else seems to be stepping up to fix it. And so you say, okay, well, I will do that. And if you do that often enough, people start asking you to come and solve our problem, right? And so I started out my career with the intention of being a psychologist. I majored in psychology. I went to graduate school in clinical psychology. I was not intending an academic career at all. I was planning to be a therapist, but I had the opportunity to do teaching as a graduate student and found that that was very fulfilling. So I decided to move in that academic direction. I could say more about that, but the fact of the matter is I really enjoyed being a faculty member, doing research, writing my articles, teaching my students. But when I published my book in 1997, Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria, and Other Conversations About Race, I started being invited to speak at a lot of different colleges and universities. And sometimes when I would be speaking, people would say, well, maybe you'd like to come and teach here. I've been teaching for a long time at a small liberal arts college in Massachusetts called Mount Holyoke College. And I wasn't really eager to leave Mount Holyoke, but I was thinking I needed a new challenge. You know, I'd been a faculty member, I was a full professor by that time, I'd been chair of my department, and I was thinking maybe teaching at a large research institution would be the answer. But I wasn't really sure. And so a friend of mine in my department said, well, I think if you're looking for a new challenge, you ought to be the dean. And I said, who in her right mind would want that job? That was my response. And she said, well, you're not using your imagination. If you were the dean, you could make changes here and innovate in ways, you know, some of the things you write about, you could implement here at Mount Holyoke, and that would be great for us and great for you, and it would set a model for other places. And I'd never thought about it in that way. So I decided, well, what's the harm in applying? I'll apply. And I got that job. And so I became the dean, and she was right, that you could do a lot of creative things from that position as an administrator, which I had not previously imagined. So while I'm being the dean, people started to say, you know, we think you'd be a good president. And I wasn't sure anyone would really want to be a president. I had sort of the same attitude, like, why would you want that job? As a dean, I worked for a president who, in my view, did not appear to be enjoying herself. And so it you know, it's like, well, what would be fun about that? But a colleague of mine, someone who'd known me a long time, gave me advice. And that person said, if you even think you'd like to be a president at some point, you should apply for one of those positions. You know, you're gonna get nominated. Even if you're not sure you want the job, you should just go through the process, because you'll learn a lot from doing that. So an opportunity came across my desk. Someone did nominate me for a position that sounded interesting, so I decided I would apply just to see what the process was like. And sure enough, it went well, and I was a finalist. And so then the search consultant said, as I'm sure many people in the room know, when colleges are doing their searches, they keep the list very confidential, right? They don't want people to know who the candidates are until the very end. So it was getting to that point where it was going to be public information who the candidates were. So the search consultant said, you need to decide, do you want this job or not? Because, you know, they're wanting you to come visit the campus. And I wasn't sure I did. Well, I was just having an experiment. I wasn't sure I did want that job. So so I asked for advice, and it was very fortunate for me that I knew 3 women, all of whom had been college presidents. And the first woman I asked, you know, do you think I should go forward? I'm not sure. I liked being the dean. I wasn't sure I wanted to move my family. I should mention I have 2 sons, and at that time, my oldest son was a freshman in college. My younger son was a freshman in high school. And, you know, that's an awkward time to move a kid. And so the first person said, you know, your youngest son's a freshman in high school. If I were you, I would wait. Wait till he's out of high school. These jobs are very demanding. You'll have other opportunities. People will nominate you again. And I thought that was good advice. The second person said, I think you should stay at Mount Holyoke as the dean. This other job is, you know, a good opportunity, but I'm not sure it's the best match for you. And if you stay, you should ask the president you work for to give you some new responsibilities so you can keep growing in your job while you wait for a new opportunity. And the third person was the president I worked for. And so I asked her what she thought I should do, and she said, well, if you're asking me, I think you should stay here and continue being the dean. And I said, well, I'm leaning in that direction for all the other reasons. I'm leaning in that direction. But if I stay here, is there something new I can do so I can keep growing? And she said, well, actually, what you don't know is that I'm going on sabbatical next year. The board is giving me a sabbatical. And if you stay here, you can be the acting president while I'm gone. I thought that was a great idea. So and she was right, I had no idea this was about to happen. And so I said, great, that would be fabulous. Because I wasn't really sure I wanted to be a president. And I thought, this way I'll get to see what it's like, and I don't have to uproot my family, and all of that would be great. So I withdrew from that search. I didn't become a public candidate, and I stayed as dean. And the following year, as promised, she went on sabbatical, and I became the acting president. And the day she handed over the keys to her office as she's out the door, she said, I bet you're gonna like it. And I did like it. I did like it. And then I started thinking about the fact that she's coming back. Anyway, I did enjoy the experience, and what I did, and it was a great experience to be able to have the responsibilities. There were some real problems to solve while she was away that she asked me to work on, and I learned a lot in that process. And while I was serving as acting president, I got nominated for the presidency of Spelman College. And so then it was, you might think, well, that was easy. You know, of course you want to be the president of Spelman College. I wasn't sure, actually. So the reason I wasn't sure is because I lived in Massachusetts. I'd never spent any time in Atlanta. I didn't go to an HBCU, but of course I knew that Spelman was a fabulous institution. And but I hadn't been there, so I decided that I couldn't make a decision about whether to even be a candidate without visiting the campus. So I flew to Atlanta. A friend met me at the airport, and we went to Spelman. And I always call this my anonymous visit. I didn't tell anybody I was coming, and we just walked around and went to the admissions office and picked up a brochure. And on the back of the brochure, there was a description of, first of all, I was very impressed by many things. I was very impressed by the beauty of the campus, the energy of the students. It was a Friday afternoon, people were out. It was January 28th, 2002, and it was 75 degrees in Atlanta. And I thought, how much better could this be? It was fabulous. But the real selling point was this description, and it was a description of the power of a Spelman education and what happens to young women after they come to Spelman and how they're transformed by that. And when I was reading that paragraph, there was a sentence in it that said, this is your heritage and your calling. Yes, I'm done. And so the rest is history.
We'll continue to discuss this.
Thank you.
And get some more insight into your travels and your journey. Dr. Hughes.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I was so excited to become involved in this presidential selection. You didn't know it, but I have been here at Tuskegee as a student. I have come back to everything that I was invited to do, and mostly in leadership roles. So I think almost for every year, I have had something to do here because of the invitation that was extended to me. And usually it was extended by students or faculty because they knew that I was moving up. All I knew was that I was having fun. Because I found education to be so exciting and so invigorating that as much as I could get, I was pursuing. So the alumni became aware that I was very interested in education and had been moving up in the positions. And when this last search was open, I'm going to tell you that alumni were so involved that they were so excited. And I was on the phone with them sometimes at night, and sometimes it included the faculty. I was trying to guide them because they were aware that they needed a start. And that's how I became back and became involved in your process. So I felt that I knew you probably better than I should because they were really involved. I started out here as a student. Some of you are aware of that, others aren't. And as a student, I didn't know what I wanted to do. So, like you, I was exploring every major that had any interest to me. And finally, I was at the end, and I discovered that I probably wanted to do something in psychology. It's interesting that we all share that. But I think we share that because the field of psychology allows us to understand people. It allows us to be flexible in how to motivate people. It allows us to understand how to give support and how to be able to communicate. So Tuskegee kept inviting me to come back to do different things, and I think about everything that one can do that Tuskegee and I have done. So I'm always here. And some of you are familiar with my face because I come when they call. I decided finally that I wanted to become engaged in leadership for women and leadership for blacks. And it was during that time that affirmative action was popular, right? Does anybody know what that is? Well, I happened to be at a university that really appreciated it and wanted to move forward. At that time, I was at San Diego State University. And the man who was president there discovered that I could produce, that I could motivate people, and that he could count on me. Also, at San Diego State particularly, you may be aware that the first women's studies program in the nation started there. And I was very much a part of that. That was an interesting time because it was also the time for Black studies. And some people saw them as competing, as you well know. So I had to finesse and cross many bridges so that I did both. I just navigated both. And in women's studies, you probably may be aware that the first women's studies program in the nation was started and founded at San Diego State University. And I was a part of that. So it was there that I became aware that I had leadership possibilities. I hadn't planned to be a president. I was just pursuing my career. And suddenly the president decided that he wanted to give me my first administrative position. That first position was to serve as the Director of Psychological Services, Career Planning and Placement for all students. And I thought that was pretty high, especially for one at my age at that point. But he saw in me what I had been unable to understand. And that was that I could get motivated and I could move and do it. And if I decided I was going to do it, I did it. And that's very much like being a president. You decide you're going to do it and you do it. So that's how I got started. And suddenly I discovered that I was being moved around from university to university. So from San Diego State, I went to Arizona State. I loved it, but it was too hot. It was so hot. I just couldn't tolerate it. So I stayed for a couple of years, and then I moved to Ohio for a few years. And one of my favorite jobs opened up at the University of Minnesota. Now, it may surprise you that I'm going to say this, because I thought, with all the ice and snow, I don't know if I'm going to be able to adjust. One of my favorite jobs was serving as vice president at the University of Minnesota. It was so invigorating and so stimulating that I just thought I would never leave. So we built our fantasy home on the lake and decided that this was going to be it. Well, in my 4th year, I started getting calls from California. And the chancellor said, it's time for you to come home. I'm going, what does that mean? We have a position, we have a presidency, and people are nominating you for this. So I went because they were interviewing in San Francisco. And my husband and I said, oh, this is a nice trip. so let's go to San Francisco. And we did that, and much to my surprise, that was the first time I really interviewed for a job. And it was a serious interview. But when you understand the importance of being able to lead and shape an institution, particularly one that has young men and women as a part of it, then you can see how you can touch the future doing that. And so I was offered the position at California State University. At that time, there was one other woman in the whole state of California as president. One. So she and I would talk a lot and confer. And then I discovered that I was being moved higher and higher and higher, because being a president is as much about being a listener and a decision maker and one who's interested in motivating others as it is doing anything else. And so I was able to understand how to do that. And it became apparent to me that being a president is not as complex as people say it is. Sure, you have to do your research. Sure, you have to publish. You have to make major decisions. And if you make the right decisions by being collaborative, engaging the right people on campus, you're going to discover that everybody likes what you're doing. Now, a university is very complex because it has adolescent students, and it needs the kind of leadership that excites them. So I discovered that if you were able to motivate faculty and staff, even in a state where the union is so powerful and so forceful, then you're going to be successful. And so I stayed there for 11 years. And I decided it was time to stop. But I'm glad I didn't stop, because in that whole process, I had not been as engaged with Black people as I wanted to be. And so when Dillard University called me and said, we want to come out and talk to you about presidency, I said, what? And they motivated me. And so I went there. Now, many of you probably followed what was happening when I got to Dillard University. What I discovered was that everything I had learned at those other institutions was true, but there was something else that was different about being at a Black university that I needed to understand. And so I spent time studying that. But having been there for about a week, less than a month, Hurricane Katrina really came and took that university under completely. And that's when I decided that I had to be very decisive, very instructive, guiding people who didn't even have homes. So one of the things I learned how to do when I was in California, really learned how to raise money. You are going to discover how important that is.
Oh, yeah.
And I have an ear to listen to that, but there I had to raise millions and millions of dollars because every single building had to be rebuilt. In addition to rebuilding buildings, I built about 4 or 5 new buildings. So every new building on that campus was built by me. But I did it by being collaborative with faculty, staff, the community, and by accessing churches, you know, Methodist churches and things like that. If you can access them, especially in time of need, they will give lots of money. Probably the biggest financial success that I had was in cultivating Washington, D.C. and the government there. Every Friday, I was there every Friday. They knew my face as well as they knew theirs because I wasn't going to let them get away with not giving the kind of funds that an HBCU needed. I wasn't going to let them. I used that over and over.
Thank you, Dr. Thank you very much. I see that, let me just make this comment. These women have some very intriguing stories. And what I'm thinking is that we really don't have enough time to go through everything that I would like to hear about. But let's go to you, Dr. Yancy, and listen a little bit to your story. And then when we come back, I have a question about challenges. Challenges that relate to gender, but also challenges that relate to in terms of HBCUs versus other kinds of institutions. Are there unique challenges that you see? But I tell us a little bit about yourself and your story.
Well, good morning. As I was driving in from Atlanta this morning, I was thinking about Tuskegee, but probably not in a way that you think that I was thinking about it. And when I came down the street that comes into the campus, there's an auditorium over there on the left, this sort of diagonal from the library. I can't remember the name of it. Logan Hall. Oh, did I dance on that stage? Children in Alabama came to, I grew up on this campus. I'm from Alabama. I still pay my taxes here. And we had to come to Tuskegee and Alabama A&M in the summer for our summer programs. We used to steal the rolls from Dorothy Hall. They made the best rolls in the world. But we would perform and compete on that stage. And then years later, my father was the Farmer of the Year. You know, Alabama, this place had Farmers of the Year. And my father won that award when I was in college, around 63 or so. And I still have that newspaper article with he and my mother with this big hat on and all on the front page of the newspaper. Auburn University published. You know, they had to do some joint things even in those days. But I grew up in the state, and I grew up on a farm. And I'm the product of 2 high school dropouts. My mother was a 7th grade dropout, and my father was a 9th grade dropout. But they sent all their children to college. They believed in education. My father always had 2 jobs. And so we learned responsibility at an early age. He said it's a poor rat who only has 1 hole to crawl in. And so that meant you had to have 2 sources of income. And I've had 2 jobs almost all of my life. Even when I was president, I had another one. Now, I couldn't trust that job. My father said, never trust that one job, but use it for your benefits. Now, I had an experience as a child that lasted with me. As a matter of fact, it helped me when I went to Shaw, and they were considered a toxic asset and about to go bankrupt. My father had a way of doing the cotton. You know, we weighed the cotton and people got paid based on the books. We kept a book. And my sister, who was older, who graduated from Tuskegee with her master's, was keeping the books. But she miscounted one day. And she was about 16 at the time, and I was 9. And my father was furious because she had wasted his money. and he took the books from her and gave them to me, and she said, you keep these books, and you better be accurate. So I learned then that accuracy was very important. I took it. I still live with that. But that was very important. And as a child growing up, I had some illnesses. And I used to read all the time. And so I traveled the world by reading Reader's Digest and Encyclopedia and all that, and decided all these places I was going to go and what I was going to do. And I decided I would probably be a professor. This is what I wanted to do. I thought I wanted to be a chemist. I got to college, and the man put me to sleep the first day. So I changed my major 4 times in college because I couldn't make up my mind. But eventually I majored in history and social sciences. And I went on to graduate school. I had a mentor named Dr. Klepka. He had been in the concentration camps. And I was just very important to him. And he helped me maneuver through getting into graduate school. But I decided I was going to be a professor. And eventually, I began to teach in a couple of places, and I taught at Barry College. And Sister Burke took me under her arms and gave me an administrative position. I was the coordinator of African American Studies, and I had lots. I had 11 part-time people. I said, this is a horrible way to be administering anything. Nobody is permanent in here. And so I stayed there a couple of years, and then I moved on to Georgia Tech. And I was moving through my life as a professor. I was like a Mao Zedong of sorts. I had a 5-year plan, and every year or so I would revise my plan, because you have to be flexible as a professor. But the professorial life, they are the only people who are free in a university. You can do what you want to do, when you want to do it, and how you want to do it. And I just loved it, and I thought I would never leave it. But then I became an administrator, and I hated it. I hated it because it seemed as if I was babysitting a bunch of white men. I was the only person of color around. I mean, it was to show you how you were the only one and knew it. One day, Mr. Farrakhan spoke on the campus, and he didn't get paid. And I didn't bring him there. And he called the switchboard and said, find that black woman and put her on the phone. And years later, I met him again on Tom Jordan's cruise, and we had a good time. What I'm saying is that I wanted to deal with students. I was student-centered, and that's what I wanted to do. But I had a mentor who was the president of Georgia Tech, and he explained to me that I needed to get some skills. And so he shipped me off to the Harvard program. He said, you need the certificate. I said, what do I need these certificates for? He said, well, Dorothy, you are female and you're black. Look at you're black. You always have to prove that you're qualified. He said, I know you don't want to do administration, but one day you might have to pluck this out of the drawer and use it. And sure enough, he did. And so I think that people do things when there are crises. I went through a divorce, and I was sort of at wit's end of not what I wanted to do. And there was a change taking place at Johnson C. Smith where I sat on the board. And I had done the strategic plan for the board, and so I had a good understanding of what was going on there. But the idea of going someplace, I didn't understand. The president used to send me these job offers all the time. So one day I had to meet with him. I said, why do you keep sending me these job vacancies? Are you trying to get rid of me? He said, no, I just want you to look around. There are things that you can do. And so I kept thinking about it. But I took a leave of absence from Georgia Tech. I hired my stuff out. I got the research center to contract my services to Johnson C. Smith, and so I went there as interim. And so I kept my job, because I was a full professor. I taught a class of 4 hours a week. I mean, who would give that up? I had a life around. I go there, but the only person who thought I could be a president was my daughter. My daughter convinced me to apply for the job when it was interim. And so on a Wednesday, I will never forget it, one Wednesday night, I sent them my resume. That Friday, I was elected interim president. Yes, there were other people competing I didn't know, and
chair of the search committee, telling me they want me to apply for the job. Well, I'm holding my job at Georgia Tech. I know intentions of moving to Charlotte. You know, a city that wanted to be Atlanta. I said, I just can't say it. I wasn't too excited about it. And so I wasn't excited about it. And so the last day, the day before the application was due, I applied. I never forget, I sat in the middle of the bed in Washington, D.C. and wrote out my letter of interest and all that kind of stuff and shipped it off. I said, nothing's going to become of this. And pretty soon I began to hear through the grapevine that 100 and some people had applied for this job. I said, they are all crazy. I'm doing it here as interim. There are 100 and some people want this job. And so pretty soon I lost that I get a letter. And the file says, we want you to bring you in for an interview. I said, I'm already here. And so they gave me a schedule, a skeleton schedule, and mine was scheduled at 5 o'clock after I worked all day. Other people were scheduled all day long. You know, they could rest, etc. So I go through my interview, I'm so tired. And then they call me back and send me another letter and tell me that now they want me to bring my significant other. This is what they do to women, you know, when you are not married. So I told my daughter, I called her up. She was a student at Northwestern. I called her up. I said, Yvonne, she was in Alexis's class. And she said, I said, they want me to bring a significant other. I said, do I take your father out of mothballs? She said, no. She said, I got a better idea. She says, I will come with you. I will be your significant other. So I sent her a ticket, and she came, and we did our interview. And so she said, what do you want me to do? So she began to tell them all the things that she would do. She'd go to the CIAA tournament. She'd go to the UNCF meeting in New York. She had a list, and she always went. She had a list of things. She still goes. A list of things that she would do. And she said, my mother's going to be successful, and you know, something's wrong with you if you don't select her. And so she was my person right there. And when I went to Shaw, I got a call from, I had retired by then. I got a call from Willie Gary. They were having financial problems. Well, my father taught me how to count, remember? So responsibility was, I don't make decisions without data. So I went to, I said, okay, I'll come with it, but I can only stay for a few months. I stay a year and get you on your track. So I did that. Well, I went back home after a year, and I helped them find the president. Well, they had a tornado hit the campus, and she didn't know what to do. She couldn't get it put back together. And so somehow or another, whatever happened, she was removed. They called me, can you come back, Doc? We need you really bad. And so I went back, lived out of my suitcase for about 3 years, and went through all the accreditation pieces. And I said, I have to leave. I had a list of things that I was going to do. I did them, and I went home. A president was not on my list of things to do. Even when it came time for my interview, Dr. Manley tutored me, the old Manley. Dr. Manley tutored me, Dr. Gloucester sat me down and tutored me and told me what to do, and then he would come and visit me at Johnson C. Smith. I knew I didn't know what I was doing, but I knew who to call.
I have a question for each one of you. I thought about challenges, and you might want to lead this into this question. As you were following your path, what do you think was the hardest decision that you've ever made in reference to your career? And then the second question is, what was the best decision that you ever made?
I'm happy to go because one has come instantly to mind, and in some ways, it's the same answer to both questions. So I told a story about how I, visited Spelman. It was clear to me that this was a job opportunity I should pursue. But I, of course, talked to my husband, and we had a lot of dialogue about it. But he said, if you don't pursue it, you will always regret it. But here's the thing. The year before, I told you my youngest son was a freshman in high school. So now, it's a year later, he's a sophomore in high school. And when the first opportunity came up, one of the things that we talked about was that I was not going to pursue it. I was going to let him finish high school. And so now we have the Spelman opportunity, and he hasn't finished high school. But he said, Mom, I think you should go for it. Everybody agreed this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for you. This is what you need to do. But, as he said, but I'm not going. You go, I'm staying here. And so we, as a family, had to think about what to do. My husband and I have this year been married 40 years and had never been apart from each other. And of course we had, short trips, but not a commuter relationship. And I'd always been available and present for our kids. And so, but my husband, who was also a professor, worked in the state of Massachusetts in the state system, and he was 2 years away from being eligible for early retirement. And our son was 2 years away from graduating from high school. So it became pretty clear to all of us that they should stay in Massachusetts and I should go to Spelman. And that was a hard decision. And I wouldn't have planned it that way, but I also think it was the best decision. And it was the best decision for a couple of reasons. One, I have to say it was a really wonderful bonding opportunity for my youngest son and his dad, to have those last 2 years of his high school experience. And while I wasn't present, I was always on email, reading homework assignments late at night, But the other part of it was great for me as a new president in a new location to have those 2 years of uninterrupted focus. To really be able to, which is not to say I didn't see them in that, as I used to say, it wasn't 2 years, it was 4 semesters, right? Because between semesters we'd be in the same place. But being able to really immerse myself without worrying, how's he doing in his new school, and all that stuff, really being able to focus, really I think helped to set my presidency on in a good direction. But it was a hard decision.
One of the things that she brought in was with women, how do we make those adjustments and that balance with family and career, and trying to make those decisions, and are we making the right decision? Dr. Hughes.
Well, I was really fortunate. I wasn't looking for a presidency. I really was not pursuing it because my husband and I were doing private practice together, and that's what we loved doing. But suddenly, when the opportunity came, he was the first to say, let's talk about this. Let's not just say no. So we talked about it, and I went to Cal State, and they made offers that were just irresistible. So that was one of the things that excited me about being able to get to a place when the faculty were cooperative, the students were excited, and even the union didn't bother me like they had bothered other people, because I didn't make their lives impossible. And I said to them, don't make mine impossible, and we can get along with it. So we had a really good time in that first presidency. The next one was a little more difficult because my experience is that being a president of an HBCU is different than being a president at a majority university. And I had to learn how to do that. I learned from my predecessor that the way faculty should be promoted is that he would make a decision and he would call them and say, come to my office and it's time for you to be promoted, believe it or not. So naturally, I talked to the faculty about what shared governance means and what they have to learn about being autonomous and making a university strong. So I was myself teaching them how to do that, and they were saying, you teaching us how to be powerful, yes, that's what faculty should do. But I knew that with that kind of perspective, I could be happy at a university because I didn't have to do it all by myself. So when I got to Dillard and discovered that the faculty needed training, I spent all of my time teaching them how to challenge me and be strong. And that was a wonderful thing to do. That was a wonderful legacy to leave for them.
That's great. And I like the thing about the shared governance. And I think it's important that, you know, even as leaders, that we understand that it's not just solely about the one person
It can't be.
dictating, but that you empower the other people to also assist you in your leadership.
Or I would simply add, or in California, you won't make it.
Dr. Yancy.
Well, I think one of the hardest decisions that I had to make was to leave Georgia Tech. I had been there over 22 years, and I had sort of developed all kinds of relationships, some good, some bad. And Georgia Tech was one of those places that was like a pressure cooker. You know, I went to work 7 days a week. I went to work on Saturdays and Sundays. If you didn't go to work, you got behind. That's the way it was when it came to being productive. And so I didn't understand people taking off the weekend. You know, thank God for Friday. I knew what Friday was, but it didn't mean so much to me. But the other part of that was that I developed a discipline that when I got to Johnson C. Smith as principal, it was an adjustment, just like you were saying. And the adjustment had to do with the lack of resources. Now they said, let's all be honest up in here. I walked into the president's office and we had a new Xerox machine and it didn't staple. I said, do they make these? I was so upset. And that's when I learned my first lesson. The lady who had bought the machine was standing there. She was former president's girlfriend. And she was the vice president. I said, oh my Lord. The person that was going to help me raise money. So you don't understand. So walking on eggs, I had learned something those 6-8 months I had been there. And I also had learned about all the deferred maintenance. I learned about all the money that needed to be raised. I learned about the fact that the computers did not work, that they were just those monitors. They only had 14 real computers in the lab, and 2 of them were broke. And so I had to choose whether I was going to roll up my sleeves and go and work myself to death for a school that I dearly loved, or whether I was going to stay at Georgia Tech and continue to drink from the trough. And those were some decisions that I had to make. And I decided you're at a stage in your life where you can take on a challenge and just take it on and see what happens. And one colleague came by my office and he said, Dorothy, if you remain student-centered, you never cared about anybody, the students on this campus. If you remain student-centered, you will be successful. And I would always remember him when I would get in a really, really tough bind. But that was a choice that I had to make. And it was very, very difficult. But I made it. And I stayed there almost 15 years. So, and I put in my technology, I got my computers, I did everything. If it had not been for UNCF and Bill Gray, I don't know what I would have done, because the hardest decision I made there was to go laptop and to do all the technology in my school. And Yahoo voted us the most wired, one of the 50 most wired small towns in the United States. When I went there, we had no wire going any place. But we did have something, and I was thank the board. I mean, boards are always blamed for a lot of things. But I had a president ahead of me who ignored his board, and I've always thanked him for it. He put in fiber. He put the fiber in the ground, and he spent over $2 million without board approval. They were mad as they could be, but if he had not made that decision, I could not have made the decision I made. And I thank him every time I see him, Bob Albright. You know, sometimes your predecessor does some good stuff and you have to say it. Absolutely.
hard for me to say I would have done anything differently. And I don't mean to say that everything was perfect, but you learn from everything that happens to you, right? You know, and so even when you make a mistake or, I can think of some personnel matters I would have handled differently. I mean, there are things I would have done differently, not hired that person instead, those kind of things. But generally speaking, I feel very fortunate to have had the opportunities that I've had, and I'm not sure that I would have done anything, I wouldn't have made any major changes. But often I'm asked in a session like this, someone will be in the audience who will say, if you want to be a college president, what should you do? And I think that the thing that I usually say is be good at something. And I say that to say it doesn't, each of us had a different route to the presidency. Some people will, Dorothy was in that social classroom. Yeah, lots of different, we all came from different places. And we have in common the social sciences, but you can be an art major, you can be an engineer, there's no discipline that is specific to being a leader. But nobody wants you to lead if you're mediocre. Right? So I got asked to do the things I was doing. When I got asked to do something new, it was because people saw I was doing what I was currently doing well. So whatever you're currently doing, do that well. Because it's, people who are doing things well will be asked to do more. And that's how you build your career.
I found that human relationships are the most important thing that drive an organization. Being effective in human relations is what a good president must do. She must be able to communicate on all levels with students, faculty, staff, and unions. And she must be a decisive person. So being decisive and also being relational is very, very important as a president. I wouldn't change the way I was with them at all. Even with the unions, I didn't give them a chance to get angry with me. And they tried. But I didn't give them that power. So for me, just being effective, publishing like everybody else, you expect faculty to do it, you do it also. You expect faculty to present at conferences, you do that also. You have to role model for faculty, staff, and students. And believe it or not, they will reward it. California has never rewarded a city president while she was living until this past year, when the Senate said, look, this one came here, built this campus, brought all these students in, made everybody happy. 2 men followed her, they failed. And we need to listen to her. So the Senate and the state made an example of a living president that would be rewarded, and I was happy about that. So doing the right thing, I think ultimately makes a difference.
Well, I don't think I would change anything. I actually like my life. I've had a fun time. I mean, I've gone to most of those places that I knew I was going to go to when I was reading the encyclopedias. I mean, my bucket list, I've learned to add things to your bucket list, because if you don't, you'll die. You'll finish it all. You're not in that mode. So I add to my list. But I wouldn't change anything about it. But I would tell a young person that you need to be good at something. And you can't be one of those things like that store, hit and miss. You have to find something that you're passionate about, stick to it, and do it well. And I think that you made the statement, Marvalene referred to Dr. McNair, when you said that you were looking for a star. She's a star because she has excelled at something that she's known for what she does. And that is very, very important. Nobody's going to bring you in if you're not a star. So, and the thing about being a star is that you also mentors will find you. I never had to ask anybody to mentor me. And people ask me all the time, will you mentor me? I said, what have you been doing? Did anybody ask you? Can they help you? But I don't say that. I'm thinking it, but I'm thinking it. But do such a great job of it. And then you will find mentors and you will find champions. And champions are people who drop your name in the right place at the right time. And as my mentor used to tell me at Georgia Tech, he and I used to go at it. I was a young whippersnapper, as they would say, in my early 20s, and I fought for everything. I put in the Office of Minority Affairs for Black students and everything, so I was always fighting him. And so one day I said, just what do you do? And he looked at me, and he thought about it. And I've never forgotten his answer, and I've lived by it. He says, my job, Dorothy, is to get the resources and make it possible for you to do your job. And don't you ever forget it. And so I learned that as a president, that was my job. My job was to make sure my faculty had what they needed to do what they were supposed to be about. And I will end on that. Amen.
This is what excellence looks like. Thank our panelists for taking the time out of their schedules to come and join us and to share in this historic event, and also to share their life story with us and to help us and guide us to become excellent leaders. Thank you again.
Thanks for the invitation.